Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot, the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. I'm your host, Brian Alexander. You can find me on social media as Red Hills Rancher on all platforms. This podcast is mainly available on audio, but you can also find video versions on both Spotify and YouTube. Okay, video versions when my editing software decides it wants to work and I can get them up. Anyway, I am back from my vacation in Hawaii, and I'm still trying to recover from the jet lag and the time change, and not to mention a little soreness in my ribs from surfing, which was something entirely new, and a few new calluses on my feet from all the trails that we hiked. I tell you, Hawaii is amazing. Get off the resorts and get out of Waikiki and put some miles on your shoes, folks. All right. This week on the podcast, an old friend joins me to talk about the recent events in the Texas Panhandle. But first, a word from our sponsors. This season of Ranching Reboot is sponsored by Land Trust. Guys, if you're still wondering about Land Trust and what they're all about, listen up. Land Trust exists to enable the enjoyment, profitability, and sustainability of America's undeveloped private lands. Land Trust connects landowners with outdoor recreators seeking recreational land access in an easy-to-use online marketplace. Land Trust is the leading recreation access network that brings people together to create income for landowners and opportunity for outdoor enthusiasts. Land Trust uses a 4-pillar organization with their partner conservation program: fundraise, experience, conserve, and grow. Fundraise with a purpose. Every adventure booked on Land Trust contributes to conservation. They donate to conservation groups for each trip, processing fees automatically supporting the species you love. Monthly, they send these contributions to their conservation partners, showcasing their commitment to wildlife and habitat preservation. Experience the unseen. Through the network of dedicated landowners, Land Trust offers a unique access to private lands for conservation efforts, research, and unforgettable experiences for members, including youth, veterans, and those with special needs. They are bridging the gap between landowners and conservation groups, enabling vital work and special moments in nature. They empower land stewardship. At Land Trust, they understand the importance of knowledgeable land management. They connect landowners with top conservation experts for advice on habitat creation, food plots, predator management, and more, ensuring land is managed sustainably and wildlife thrives. I'm having a hard time this morning, guys. Grow Together. Their co-marketing efforts aim to increase outdoor experiences, driving alternative revenue for landowners and supporting wildlife management as a valuable asset. As they expand, so does their ability to fund habitat improvements and conservation efforts, highlighting the critical role of hunters and private landowners in conservation success. Join us in making every one of your hunting and outdoor trips a step towards conservation. Go check out www.landtrust.com/reboot and see what you and Land Trust can do together. That's www.landtrust.com/reboot, or just click the link in the show notes. All right, back to the episode. For this week, we're going to talk about the recent fires in the Texas Panhandle, and hopefully you're not totally burned out about hearing it. For those of us that live in the Great Plains, fire is a fact of life. And when the head fire comes over the ridge straight at you in front of a 40-mile-an-hour wind, it can be the scariest thing imaginable. It can also be incredibly beneficial and beautiful. The grasslands we call home evolved with fire over the last 50,000 or so years, and it's been in recent times that us European immigrants didn't understand fire or how to use it. Before the Anderson Creek fire in 2016, there hadn't been anything close to what is defined as a megafire, which is 100,000 acres or more. There hadn't been a megafire in the plains that anybody could remember, and it seems like 2016, we've had one almost every year. 2017 was the Starbuck fire just west of me. 2018 brought the Ray fire down in Oklahoma, burned out my friend Jimmy Emmons. There was also the Camp Fire in California that year that was very deadly. Then we had the 4-county fire up in Ellis County, Kansas in December 2021. And now we've had the Smokehouse Creek fire in the Texas Panhandle that's well over 1 million acres. Fire happens, folks. My guest today and we talk about some of these past fires, what can be done about it, and what will happen in the future if we don't start putting more fire on the ground and getting these fuel loads under control and a little bit more manageable in the wildland and urban interface areas. Steve Swaffer is an experienced natural resources professional working with farmers and ranchers to improve their soils, crops, forages, ecosystems, and livestock. When I met Steve, he was he was the director of natural resources at Kansas Farm Bureau, and then he moved on to be the executive director for No Till at the Plains. For the last 2.5 years, he's been with Noble Research Institute. So please welcome Steve Swaffer, Ranching Reboot.
Is the background okay?
Yeah, background's fine, man. Looks great.
Okay. All right.
So, what have you been up to?
Well, I just returned not too long ago from South Texas, where we gave one of our land essentials courses, Noble Land Essentials, where we're teaching foundational regenerative agriculture concepts to folks. We start with the soil health principles, and then we go into the ecosystem processes and explain to them how those work together. And then, we're also giving them a little taste of grazing, hoping that they will come back to us or somewhere else to refine their grazing management. We've just launched our grazing course here fairly recently. We've got another one here coming up, going to be launched this year. And so the other piece of that we give them is just the hands-on opportunity to experience monitoring protocols. So not everybody's into monitoring, but if you're kind of getting started and you need some benchmarks, we give you pretty easy stuff. Your shovel, your eyes, and your nose is about all you need.
Eyeballs is probably the most underrated tool in a rancher's toolbox.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, we're here with Steve Swaffer from Noble Research.
Are you editing this, Brian?
Maybe. If you feel like you're jumping in the middle of a conversation, you kind of are. We've been talking for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So I just got back from Hawaii. I've been back just a few days, and Steve and I were just visiting about the islands, and man, it's different there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the soil health principle that comes to mind that you probably don't have to worry about very much in Hawaii is keeping the soil covered, because it'll grow something out there, because there's afternoon rains most days.
Yeah, that was a little bit strange. And the thing that I noticed is there's almost no dust anywhere.
Yeah. Even on the concrete.
Like, you kind of have to get to a pretty chewed up parking lot before there's a whole lot of dust. The thing that I thought was really interesting is there are chickens everywhere.
It's animal integration. Right.
They're just feral. They're just like feral all over Oahu, no matter where we went, whether we were on the North Shore, whether we were on the leeward side, whether we were down in Waikiki. Dude, there are feral chickens running around in downtown Waikiki.
Cool.
It is the wildest thing ever.
So I guess I'm curious, do you find eggs?
I never saw any eggs, but I did see several hens with chicks, like with 8 or 10 chicks following them around. And, having chickens here, like our chickens, yeah, whatever. Oh, a chick? What's that? An egg? That thing came out of my butt. Like, they don't have a clue what they're doing. We've bred it all out of them because of the way we keep chickens, but those feral chickens in Hawaii, like, they can apparently reproduce on their own, because I've seen them, like, I saw hens with chicks following them around. It's interesting because, we don't see that very much.
No. Now and Brian, you live in an area that is one of the most susceptible to this, but we have plenty of feral hogs down here, and you guys continue to keep them at bay, which is fantastic on the southern border of Kansas. But, that's one of those unintended consequences sort of deals where we're getting an awful lot of feral hog damage down in this country.
We've been pretty fortunate that Oklahoma has managed to keep a handle on their pig problem, and they haven't really come up here to the southern end of Kansas to threaten us. I do remember it was probably 12 or 14 years ago, just after I came back from the Navy, there were quite a few pigs around, and we did have, like, I remember 06, 07, 08, 09. We spent quite a bit of time, like, driving around documenting pig damage. And then instead of making the pigs legal to hunt here in Kansas, I think they did kind of a better thing. They said, we're not going to allow you to hunt hogs. We're going to go exterminate them all. So I think it was Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I'm pretty sure it was them with USDA Wildlife Services, and they got a helicopter, and they flew out here for several years in the spring, like late winter, early spring.
Right.
There was one day that they got like 350 hogs.
Yeah.
Like it was a massacre, and they just kept flying and kept trapping, and they keep monitoring them.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep looking, but I think we've been pretty successful at keeping them out of here. And it's because we said we can't hunt them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Because
mean,
as
the
soon as
commercialization of this animal is really what drives human beings to want to have them. And so whether it be, I don't really think it's a consumption issue. This is about the sport hunting of feral hogs. And that's what Kansas had the foresight to say, hey, this isn't a sport species. This is not a game species. This is a nuisance species. And so between U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, APHIS, USDA APHIS, and Department of Health and Environment, recognizing the health issues that come along with those hogs. And if you've not seen one of these on the ground, you can see as many as 1,000 ticks on one side of a hog. And they're typically flea infested as well. But, Wildlife and Parks basically said, we're not going to create this issue. And I applaud them for that.
it is the hog problem getting worse in Texas, or is there kind of a stabilization?
Now, you think, Brian, about the reproductive capacity of just one pig, and she can have 4 to 5 litters in a year. And they are really, really intelligent animals. And so when you decide to go and try and exterminate a sounder, a group of hogs, you can't really deploy the tactic until you can get them all. Because if you think about just one, doesn't get in the trap, escapes whatever tactic you're using, now that's 4 or 5 more litters more than likely coming. And so it is a challenge. Private landowners are trying to attack it themselves. Unfortunately, they're spending tons of resources on trapping, but it is just it's a continual issue here down in this border of Texas and Oklahoma where I live along the Red River. It's just too wild and woolly, quite honestly, to get to them and trap them all. So it's hopefully a maintenance issue. I don't really ever think we're going to reduce this population back enough where they're not going to be damaging. It's trying to keep it from getting worse.
Yeah, and it's another one of those big thorny problems that, if you go to Texas and say, okay, we're going to outlaw hog hunting so we can get rid of this hog problem, you're going to have a whole bunch of large landowners going, well, hey, I've built a $2 million a year business on this. You can't take that away from me. And, I'd be a little bit pissy if the government said, hey, that thing you've been doing, you can't do it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those where the horse is already out of the stall. And I don't think you're dragging the horse back into the stall. We just need to probably cooperatively work with those folks who are making an income from that opportunity on their land, and don't take that away from them, but also educate them about the things that they can do to limit the expansion off of their own properties. But it's going to be a concerted effort, and quite honestly, the price tag attached to it is probably what scares most people.
Yeah, price tag, and that makes me think of the maintenance price tag of just owning land and trees and invasive herbaceous. Wow, I can't talk this morning. Invasive herbaceous vegetation. This is what happens here. I have notes, right? I have things I want to talk about, but we're not there yet.
All
right. So, and I forgot what I was talking about.
Maintenance, annual maintenance requirements for a landowner.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Annual maintenance requirements for a landowner. And, we think, okay, it's just fences, oil changes, and a pickup. But what about managing your trees? What about managing your brush? And, some of that can be done with appropriate grazing planning, with, appropriate species selection for your environment. We can get into that a little bit later. Number one threat to the Great Plains is loss of habitat. And, I've said for years that the state of Oklahoma loses 700 plus acres per day to eastern red cedar tree encroachment. I forget who I spoke to in the last 6 months here on the podcast. Somebody told me that Texas loses over 1,000 acres a day to houses.
Mm-hmm.
Not just what they're losing, also to invasive vegetation. And I can imagine, if Oklahoma's losing 700 acres a day, Texas is probably losing something like 2,000 acres a day to trees, plus 1,000 acres for houses. That's 3,000 acres a day of ag land that's being just lost. And we can't change that. I mean, we're not going to stop people from building houses, I don't think. Changing the brush, we can work on that. Maybe we can get into that a little bit. But I think that what that means is those of us that are a little farther away from town, maybe do we need to start looking at how we're going to make up that production from that lost land, from encroaching houses and encroaching trees?
Yeah, that's a great thought, Ryan. I guess I would encourage those that think about having to make up for others, take a hard look inward, and say what is going on my property that that I'm losing production, and it shouldn't really matter what's going on in Texas or Oklahoma and those losses. It's on my own place. Why have I got 30% of my pasture that's ungrazable? Because I managed in a way that has allowed the expansion of eastern red cedar or mesquite or some other invasive Sericea lespedeza. And really, I think that if folks can start looking at their own properties and looking at the amount of bare soil that they have, that's lost production right there. Even if it's not covered in with a tree, if it's been overgrazed or it's been tilled and it's bare soil, your production is quite small there. And so, I guess I would say let's start inward, and see where we can assist and help folks just to get the production ramped up on their own places. And whether that's a balancing act with the concrete expansion and the habitat losses, I don't know. But what I guess I'm more focused on is helping that individual person make sure that their ranch is as productive as it can be.
Yeah, for sure. We'll circle back to Sericea and maybe mesquite later.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that's been on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of other people out there have been thinking about this too, is the Smokehouse Creek fire in Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. I haven't looked in a couple of days, but I know I think the last time I saw it was like 1.1 million acres, and they were still trying to get, quote, containment on it, which my idea of containment and security is not quite what the Forest Service is, but we'll just go with them. Stories. I have a friend interviewed previously on this podcast. He got completely burned out and he's lost 700 animals.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for a fact that it's not going to be the only story of several hundred animals being lost coming out of that area. And it's horrible to think about. But that cat's already out of the bag, horses out of the barn. We can't do anything about that. Like, we can't go put the fire out last week. But what we can do is let's talk about what's next after a wildfire. What's next for the first month, for the first 3 months, for 6 months, and then what should you be thinking about for the future, for the next year, for the next 2 years, for the next fire cycle? So, in my mind, the wildfire is always a threat as long as we live in the Great Plains. Period. Like, we live in an environment that has had fire in it for thousands of years. And that is a fact. there's all kinds of publications out there, things you can do, like, passive defenses, how to harden your structures. I remember in 2016 when Anderson Creek wildfire came through and burned out my place. I did enough tours around because I know the area. I did enough tours around, the few houses that burnt. Okay, I could see what they had in common. They all had big cedar trees on the windward side.
Yep.
What's the windward side? Well, we think usually it's the south side. And looking at the fires that we've had over the last several years, Smokehouse Creek, the big one, the Ray fire that burned out Jimmy Emmons down in Oklahoma, the Starbuck fire that burned out, some of my friends west of here in 2017, Anderson Creek. Northwest is where you need to be worried about, not the south. Don't worry about that south wind. That south wind's only 20, 25 miles an hour, and you can see that one coming. It's the weather pattern. The fires get going on that south wind, and then the next day that wind switches through the west to something like a west wind or a northwest wind at 50 miles an hour. And that's when we have big problems.
Yep. Yeah. So the commonality in all those fires is time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about fire season, but seriously, I've never even thought about this, but I bet if we looked at the beginning date on those fires, they're probably within 30 days.
Oh, I guarantee you they are.
Yeah.
It's okay. 30 might be a little bit thin. I'd go like about 45. So February 15 to March 15th. I mean, and even into the end of March. And I think the window kind of moves a little bit based on the climate that we're having for that year. Because in the last 10 years, I've seen, almost a 2 or 3 month slide on where we can have, that green up in that peak fire season. And I would say that our peak fire danger is right before green up. The end of a long dormant season, end of a long dry winter. The end of a long dry winter when there's just nothing green growing. I mean, that's peak danger.
For sure. I mean, it's definitely going to be the most intense fire time of the year. So, it's one of those where we're in low humidity conditions most of this period. That fire is going to burn hot and fast. And then if it gets into that fuel that has, throwing up sparks in the air like our cedars do, how do you contain that? It really does create a major containment issue. But, if we look at the root of that, Brian, it's about management. It's about how we've managed our land. It's about some of the fear that we have created around intentional fire. And so, whether it's a southern driven wind, western driven wind, northern driven wind, it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that the fuel is there, and that we've ignored that situation that we've created for ourselves, and now we're scared of it. But I guess you talked about what that first month would be like. And I've not been through a personal fire, so it's hard for me to put the loss to that, but the renewal that's going to come in that first year, I think could be pretty encouraging for those that go through it. I think there's an opportunity there for folks to kind of reset. Financially, it's going to be tough to make that reset, of course, but if you've always thought about, okay, am I grazing correctly? Can I graze differently? I want to try something different. You're starting, so to speak, with a blank slate at that point. And so, I don't encourage anybody to make wholesale changes across their entire ranch. That's too risky, quite honestly. But this is an opportunity to try some smaller stuff, and see what works, and see if you can manage so the situation doesn't happen to you again. That's the key. The definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yep. Now, a fire burning in grass, I mean, even in front of a 40-mile-an-hour wind with no humidity, it's scary.
Yeah.
It scares me a lot less than a pasture full of cedar trees.
Sure does.
A grass fire, okay, that's going to be pretty predictable. Once it starts getting into those cedars, really like canyons full of cedars and they blow up, you're going to be throwing sparks and embers a quarter to a half a mile in front of the flame front. Good luck keeping up with that. It's going to be hard. And I'm not saying that you're going to go out and you're going to shut down a 40-mile-an-hour wind, a head fire in 6-foot tall big blue stem in a 40-mile-an-hour wind. That ain't happening either. I've seen that just hop right over a 50-foot county road and keep going like it wasn't even there. But some of the things that help, like you can plan grazing a little bit to help mitigate fire risk. Like through the dormant season, maybe bring your cows up, graze south of your compound, and then graze, the northwest pasture that's just northwest of your compound. And like I was saying, I'm a lot more scared of that fire coming out of the northwest behind a 50-mile-an-hour wind than I am it coming from the south in front of a 20. And we get a lot more south winds. Okay, so we've also talked about timing of fire.
Yeah.
The big wildfires we've had, they've all been between the beginning of February and the end of March. I'm trying to think if we've had any in April. The Smokehouse Creek was probably one of the earlier ones that we've had. I know the Ray Fire was beginning of March. What was the other one we had? The Ray Fire is the one that got Jimmy Emmons. Anderson Creek, we were end of March. We were 22nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's name escapes me. Starbuck in 17. That was beginning of March.
Yeah.
Well, then
as much as we could track that to, the time frame of year, it would be interesting to kind of look at where that green line moves south to north and relates to where those fires are.
Okay. I get that. And I was kind of going towards causes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where I was going. And I'm also thinking of a fire. I don't think it had a name, but it was up around Russell, Kansas a year or two ago in December, like mid-December. Yeah. Now, if I had a choice of when I was going to get burnt out, I would do it at the end of March because I'm so close to green grass. I would not do it in December. That would be horrible because you're going to look at it being burnt all the way till April.
Yeah.
You can't pick the timing. Here's where I'm going. These fires that we've had, Anderson Creek, we think was started by power lines slapping together along the road. Starbuck, they think was started by power lines slapping together. The Ray Fire, that was power lines slapping together. I think they called it the Paradise Falls or Paradise something fire that was up there around Russell and Ellis.
Yep.
I don't know. Was that power lines?
I don't remember, Brian, but probably a pretty likely scenario, don't you think?
Yeah. And then we go out to California. That I think they called it the campfire. One of the largest, most deadly fires they've had. Started by power lines slapping together. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Okay. And all I'm saying is we have extremely high fire danger for parts of the year in high wind conditions, and some human infrastructure that we have built seems to be causing problems. And nobody really wants to admit that. Nobody really wants to talk about that, this power line slapping together has caused a lot of these wildfires and a lot of these damage. I digress. The natural fire pattern. When have you ever seen a natural cause fire get started in the plains? What time frame?
Always spring for the most part, because it's the high lightning period.
Okay. I've seen more of them in July and August than I have in March, April, May.
Okay.
And maybe it's not like I've got a huge body of research behind this, and it's like, well documented and studied. It's just what I've noticed. But yeah, July and August is what I've noticed is when lightning starts fires. And those growing season burns in July, August, they can do a world of good.
Ecologically, they're fantastic.
Easier to control. I mean, because you've got some humidity, you've got some green grass, things aren't quite as spicy. Yeah, when
Mhm.
you're trying to burn a pasture and it's 85 or 100 degrees outside, everybody probably needs about 4 cases of water to drink.
Yeah.
But that's okay because you're generally a little bit less stressed out than I am. Like, I'm a lot less stressed out in July and August on a fire than I am in March.
Yeah. Mm.
Just me. Um, but prescribed fire can really play a role in helping mitigate wildfire danger and wildfire damage. Um, gosh, what was it? I think there was a prescribed fire around Borger, Texas, that saved some ranches and saved part
Mhm.
of the town this year. Um, can you maybe explain how doing a prescribed fire helps mitigate wildfire risk?
Sure. Well, it's all about fuel loads in so many ways. And when we use that tool, not only for ecological renewal on a historical frequency, whether that be a Native American created fire or the lightning induced fire, we're essentially taking that opportunity to burn off that fuel that has been built up over a couple to 5 years, depending on what it might have been, and so that takes away that grass fuel, but it's also stunting the successional ecological process that's happening. That's how we maintain grass in the plains is with fire. It keeps that next plant community from taking over. And so from grasses, we end up with the small woodies, the bushes, the shrubs, that kind of thing. And that eventually can end up in the hardwood and pine juniper type forests, at least here in the southern plains. But fire is what keeps that at bay. Fire is what keeps grass grass. And so if we use that to our advantage, we're keeping our fuel loads not only from the grasses down, but from that next level of succession, whether that be the brushy types or on up into the woodies, big woodies.
Yep. We were talking about maintenance earlier, and I remembered some numbers that an old friend told me. Um, and these are probably 8 or 10 years out of date by now. So the number was you need to spend $10 an acre a year controlling cedar trees. Because if you don't, that adds up. If you don't do it for 10 years, you're going to be spending well over $100 an acre. And if you don't take care of it for 50 years, you're going to be spending
Hmm.
thousands of dollars an acre. Having done a little tree work myself, I have a hard time arguing with those numbers.
Yeah.
It's something that needs to be taken care of because trees are funny, man. They grow pretty
Mhm.
slow and we don't notice them. And you just won't notice, one day you'll be like, oh, there's some little trees out there. No big deal. And you come back a year later and you're like, oh, they're a little bit bigger. There's maybe a few more. Let's be real. You don't say that. You don't think that. You don't even notice them happening because they're happening so slow. And then you turn around one day and you're like, why don't I have any grass on my pasture? And where did all these damn trees come from?
Yeah.
Seen it happen. So I'm sure you know the story, Steve, about, when my dad came here
Yeah.
out at the Western Barber County. It was kind of an overgrown underwater cedar forest. The next door ranch didn't have cedars on it. So dad went over there and he's like, why don't you guys have cedars on it? And the foreman at the time, he said, well, since I've been here, every winter we just pick a ridge to go down and we go down it with hatchets and chainsaws and loppers. And we cut every cedar tree we can get. And we get that one done, we'll go do another one. Okay. So that started, dad's cedar tree obsession. And now, of course, that ranch changed hands several times and it got a little bit overgrown, but Anderson Creek kind of fixed that. And hopefully the current caretaker will keep burning. We want to, like, he's expressed desire to keep burning. And we're gonna I shot my mouth off and said we were trying to plan a big old like burn of like 18,000 acres. That's getting cut now. I think we're at around 11,000 and it's doubtful we had to move a couple fire lines and that's really complicated the preparation. So that might not get done this year. Might have to punt next year. But more of the story is we're trying to get some country burn. Um, So recovery from a fire. Let's shift gears into that because that's kind of where we're at. I kind of wanted to talk about like what can we do to prepare for fire season next year. Um, Maybe that's a conversation a little bit better left for the summer or fall. Let some of the wounds heal. We can get into that a little bit, but recovery after a fire. And I before and I want you to just have free reign to say what you're going to say.
Sure.
But before you do, I think mental health is very underappreciated after a fire. And having been through one, it's tough. Like it really takes a toll on you, and it takes a toll for quite a while until you get some rain and things start getting green and the ash kind of settles down. My biggest piece of personal advice is to anybody who's affected by wildfire, as soon as you can, find a time to get away with your sweetie for a couple of days. Just get out of there. Get off the ranch. Go see something green. Go feel rain on your face. Get away from the wreck that you've got at home so you can focus, come back with a clear head, and attack the problem.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, it would sure be hard to walk out that door and see that black every time you walk out that door, and probably trying to count numbers of posts and corners that are going to have to be replaced. And yeah, I think that's great advice, Brian. And hopefully, as you come back from the renewal of your mind with your significant other, it can be the renewal of your passion for the ranch. Again, I haven't been through it, and so it's hard for me to relate 100%. But I have been on burns, and I've seen what happens to your pastures after that burn. And once that green vegetation starts emerging, and it's tender and it's full of sugars, and it's so encouraging because now you're going to probably see some species that you haven't seen in a while. The power of fire is it stimulates certain plants. And so, that's an opportunity to look, explore, learn. Hey, wonder what that plant would do for my livestock if I let it express itself. That the self-medication ability of livestock with Forbes in particular is pretty amazing. If you just let them sniff it and taste it a little while, they'll figure it out, what to do with it. So, but, again, I want to think about as a renewal process, what is a problem area that you had on the ranch, whether it be cedar infestation, or I really struggle to get utilization on that area. This is an opportunity to maybe change that pattern. And the management strategy, the way you move animals, the way you construct fences. And when I say construct fences, I'm really thinking more along the lines of temporary adaptive fences that give you the ability to put the animals where you want the animals, influence their movements so it influences the ecology of your pastures. It's obviously water limited, but this is the opportunity, I think, for a lot of folks to really now change the carrying capacity on their ranches. And what does that do? That gives you the ability to maybe manipulate your stocking rates up a little bit and maybe make a little more profit. But yeah, that's the benefit I see once you can kind of come out of the darkness. And I think we all need to acknowledge anybody that's been through one of these things, and they are devastating, just like a tornado or a flood or any other natural disaster. There's going to be some grieving, and there's going to be some recovery time, and people need support.
100%. And the thought I had was, you have to buy time. Like that's the name of the game after the burn, is you're buying time till you get back to green grass. And whatever that means, for some people, the priority is going to be just getting a string around the few animals they have left so they don't leave.
Yeah.
And getting them to a place where they can, that's convenient, that they can haul food and water to them. look, nobody's going to get any shade from me at all for putting 510 acres so they can feed them for the next couple of months. Like, you got to do what you got to do to manage your workload, to get through back to where we have green grass, which, I mean, we're recording on March 7th. When should green up be in Ardmore?
Already happening, and it should be about another 10 days from my perspective. I mean, we're in a 36 to 40 inch rain cross timbers area here, Brian. And our springs are coming sooner and sooner. We've already had a 90-degree day in Ardmore, Oklahoma this winter. We've also had 40 and 50 mile an hour winds several times, but with rain and soil temperatures getting above 55 degrees, stuff's going to grow. And particularly down here where we have a lot of stuff that if you just let it happen, it's going to reach out and grab you, cut you, scrape you, poke you. The plants are evil down here if you don't manage them well. But I'm looking out at my yard right now. I've got Bermuda grass that's still dormant, but I got all kinds of cool seasons coming up. I've even got clovers coming up to give my bees some pollen soon.
Okay. So like I said, I've been traveling for like 2 weeks. I'm not even sure what time zone I'm in. I'm barely aware of what state I'm in. I think I have to leave to go to Wichita Falls to do Darrendale's Farm Expo this afternoon. We'll get it figured out. But time is the most important thing, and it's just dealing with the stress, dealing with the time to get back to green grass. And 2 weeks, once you're in the window of growing temperatures for your soil, it just takes a little bit of moisture, and 2 weeks. And do you know, did the Panhandle get some good winter moisture? Do you know?
Not nothing above average, Brian, but that was the area of Oklahoma that got more summer and fall moisture than any other part. I mean, Beaver County, I think, had their record annual rainfall this year, and so they were wet going into the winter. And I grew up in north central Oklahoma, Enid area, and we were wet all winter there. I mean, I trudged through several inches of water to get to a few pheasants this year. So,
I mean, it's been reasonably moist here in the Red Hills. Like, I've got no complaints at all. I think we're set up really good to have a good spring. It's just kind of curious if you knew anything. Okay, what would be the worst mistake that somebody would make after a fire?
Well, I guess that depends on what their management was prior to the fire. But if they burned up because of poor management, going back to that exact same style of management would be the biggest mistake that they could make. But from a financial standpoint, I think getting in too far. I've got to replace every bit of perimeter fence on the ranch, and it's got to be done this year. Otherwise, I can't keep enough cattle to make it. That mentality, I think, would be quite scary. And so managing your expectations for yourself, making sure that you're not overtaxing yourself just because you've been through a disaster doesn't make more of you. You need to understand you can only do what you can do. Let community help, honestly. But yeah, I think making sure that you're not going back and making the same mistake that may have brought that place up in flames, and then making sure that you're being reasonable with what you can do over the next recovery months. I mean, that's just it's human nature to say I got to go fix all this right now, and it's just not possible.
No, it isn't. And one of the ways that I dealt with that was, and yeah, 2016 was a little bit different. I just reached out on social media. I made a big call on social media and said, hey, I need some help. This is what happened. This is the work that's got done. or this is the work that needs done. I need some help. I was very fortunate. I had a lot of really awesome volunteers, many of which I'm still in contact with, that came out, helped me weld up corner braces, helped me set them, put concrete in. It was a long summer of, pulling wire back up on those corners we set, rebuilding gates, restringing electric fence. But being able to have that big surge of labor come out to do a lot of just so many man hours of labor, that made it a manageable thing for me to handle on my own at my own pace through the year. And going back to my question to you, worst mistake after a fire. Okay, maybe that wasn't really the most fair question. Um, but I agree with your answer that the people that have been the ranches that were set stocked before Anderson Creek,
Yep.
most of them were still set stocked after Anderson Creek. And now here we are in 2024. We're 8 years after that fire. And that pasture, those pastures that were set stocked, I'm talking like a ranch that's like not even 10 miles west of me. It's worse.
Yeah.
It's worse because those pastures never had a chance to recover after Anderson Creek. Like, they just left cows out there.
Mm-hmm.
And went and just kept feeding them and kept feeding them and kept feeding them. And as soon as a green blade of grass would come up, a cow would run over there and nip it off, and it never had a chance to recover. The pastures that didn't have anything on them for 45 or 60 days after the fire, there's big blue stem, there's Indian grass, there's all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah.
So the opposite side of that question is, what's the best thing you can do after a fire? And I'll let you go first.
Now I'm going to flip it at you because you already answered it, Brian. Because when I wanted to ask you, when that outpouring of help came to you, how did that make you feel?
Oh gosh. It made me feel like I was supported and like there were people out there that actually cared about what we were doing.
So that's the answer to your question. What's the best thing they can do? Ask for help.
I like that. Ask for help and accept it.
Yeah. It's number one person in the world that doesn't want to accept help. You're looking at him on the screen right now. Hard for me to do.
Yeah.
And so, but when it's offered and when it comes, the feelings that you get are pretty unique and pretty gratifying to know that people care and they will come to your assistance.
I was kind of thinking about some of the folks that came down to help me rebuild, and most of them are still the ones I'm still in contact with. They're still in ag or ag adjacent, and not going to say that they're doing anything close to what I'm doing, like, high frequency, high density rotation grazing. There's I'm not going to say it. I was going to maybe say some of the people that don't want to identify anybody, don't want to call anybody out like that.
Sure.
Maybe let's move into like a little bit of post-fire grazing planning, because I know you're kind of a grazing planning guy.
It's pretty new to my library, but yeah, I this is what's really cool about particularly native forages. But it's applicable to introduced forages as well, in that you can plan to make change. You can plan for profit, and you can plan for your forages to give you their maximum abilities. Planning is done, I don't know, a million different ways. We see planning charts, we see journals, we see applications on your phone that can be used for planning, but that's got to be what's comfortable for you. The important part of planning is setting a goal that I want to achieve this, and here's how I'm going to accomplish that through the grazing plan, whether that be increasing carrying capacity, adding more animals, taking advantage of more areas of the ranch, increasing the grazable acres through a management strategy. But it all starts with setting a goal and having some actions that will help you achieve that goal, and having benchmark down the road. Okay, it's June whatever, and I should have received 50% of my annual precipitation by now. Have I? If the answer is no, then the second question is, do I have the amount of forage that I should have grown by now? And the answer is no. Then it's time to start making potential decisions. And if you don't have a plan for that, you're flying by the seat of your pants. If you don't have your financial information, you don't have market analysis, you're probably going to make at best a 50-50 call, whether it's successful or not. So for me, that's the beauty of planning. And as you get more experience with it, it probably needs to be less formal. It becomes more intuitive. Just like, somebody like Brian would walk out into a pasture and his eyeball's going to tell him pretty close to pounds of forage per acre that are out there. For someone who's like me, who's not out there on a daily basis, I'm more inclined to go out there with my grazing stick and get a little bit estimate. So, it's a tuning your mind and your eye to that. So that's, for me, that's why we need to plan.
I like it. Inventory, grazing grass inventory. So right now in my pastures, I can go out and I can measure with my eyeball. I'll probably take a grazing stick just so I can get a little tighter on that number. So I'll go out with my grazing stick and I'll make a guess at what my inventory is right now, beginning of March. And most of my inventory is going to be brown grass, dormant stockpile.
Yeah.
So for the folks that don't have that at all, what's the challenge in managing the grazing planning without having any residual stockpile at all and only having what's been grown after the fire?
Yeah. So the key there, Brian, is recovery. Your forages have been through the devastation of a fire, and they are now going to go into a biological, physiological recovery period, where not only do they have to grow the above ground forage, but they're also going to have to grow some root mass, because they don't even have photosynthetic receptors out there to help them make the material, the plant stock, the leaves. So I can't honestly tell somebody you need to let that forage recover to the point at which it was before that fire came through, because financially that may be devastating. What I will say is, let that forage recover just as long as you can. If you've got alternatives with substitute feed, this may be the right time for substitute feeding, because if you go in and now you begin to graze that newly grown forage, you're going to be taking carbohydrates away from that plant, disadvantaging that root mass even more. And so you're lengthening out the recovery period even more, if you can even get there. And so even though it's a renewal period, you, just like human beings, you do, after you've been sick or after you've been through something, you got a recovery period before your body is going to get back to 100%. It's no different in our grasses. It's no different, quite frankly, in our soils. They need recovery as well.
Okay. So if you got burned out today, let's just say fire comes through here while we're doing this podcast, and you've got to replan your grazing tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk me through what that would look like?
Yeah. So I'm starting with, where am I on precipitation right now? Do I have any soil moisture left that's actually going to get my grass going? Or do I need a rain before that can even happen? Did I use up all that moisture through the fire? And that's a pretty likely scenario. So I'm probably looking at what my weather patterns are in the next 14 days. If I don't see much of a chance for that, I'm probably looking for supplemental forage somewhere else. Where's pasture that I can rent? Who's a friend that maybe has some green growing small grains that I can put them on for a little while and rent that out? If my pastures got burned up, probably pretty likely my hay got burned up too. So I'm probably going to try to supplement some hay, but I'm going to probably make that hardest decision in the next 10 days. Do I need to destock? That's really the hardest question folks have to answer for themselves. And that is the hardest question for any grazer. What is the right time to destock? And if you are going to be stocking above the carrying capacity of your pastures, even when they recover, that's the time to destock. There's wonderful cull methods and things that you can use to analyze your herd to make those tough decisions and maybe not feel good, but feel better. You got some older cows that quite frankly, you may get one or two more calves out of them, but they're 1,100 pounders. Their daily demand is going to be higher than, that heifer that you retain. So maybe she's giving you 10 good calves, but now's her time. Those are the kinds of things that I guess I'm going to make those tough decisions. But what I for sure don't want to do, Brian, is not make decisions. I don't want to just wait around to see what happens. So I'm calling friends. I'm looking at what opportunities that I might have to harvest animals and maybe make a different income. I'm not in the business of selling packaged meat right now, but I really got to get 5 off of my place right now. Do I have an opportunity to reach out and maybe do some private sale for that meat? That's the kind of thing that can maybe change the outlook when you have to make these decisions.
Okay. Just kind of circling back, you said something like, you're going to monitor moisture 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
2 weeks after rain is when you feel like you might have some grass, and I think that's a pretty good baseline for people to kind of work off of. Like,
Yeah.
If you're burned out, plan on hauling hay for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
just minimum.
Yeah.
Put them in a sacrifice paddock, get a wire around them, and just haul feed to them. Haul all they need. Try to get them happy, because they're going to be there for 2 weeks. And yeah, that pasture might look like crap for a while, but it's better than your whole ranch going backwards because you're overgrazing plants that have had zero recovery on the whole place. And I think that's what I saw in the aftermath of Anderson Creek, is a lot of guys that run a set stock program just left the cows out.
Mm.
And or just put them back out in pasture, whatever pasture had a wire around it so they could just keep track of them.
Yeah.
And man, if your pasture has a history of being overgrazed and overutilized, a fire is your chance to reset that. You said you made a comment about like a clean slate, maybe moving some fences, doing something like that. And for some reason, I feel a little bit defensive. And let me explain why.
Sure.
Because I saw that opportunity. I really did. I saw that opportunity, and yeah, there were a few fences I moved, some alignments that I changed, but on the whole, I didn't. I just put things back where it was. Some of the electric fence got moved. A lot of that wire had to be replaced. A lot of the post had to be replaced. But my line fences, my like interior subdivisions, they were put in barbed wire in the 80s and 90s. And they were mostly steel. I mean, they set hedge corners, which I don't have anymore. Those hedge post corners, they look great. They look cool. They don't survive fire well. So we replaced them all with steel. And, I look at a fence that's 30 years old. Okay, the bottom 2 wires has some heat damage on them. All right. They'll last another 60 years. I've got a fence that just has the corners burned out of it. What's the quickest thing in the world to do? Just go set a corner and stretch the wire up. So that's what we did. Now, if my fence was 50 or 80% destroyed because it was, half wood posts.
Yeah.
I'd be looking at a different scenario. Like I'd look at that and you're like, is it worth going and replacing all the posts in this fence that's not really even in a great place? Now's the opportunity. Half the fence is already gone. Why don't we just roll up the wire and move it, or put it somewhere else, or just not have a barbed wire fence there, come back in with a single strand that cost 15 cents a foot. So there are a lot of those opportunities, but we're always water limited on where we can move water and that kind of thing. And yeah, it can be a tremendous opportunity to rearrange your infrastructure. But just my personal feeling, I feel like very, very few people would take that opportunity, because it's like adding more work on top of more work.
I guess I probably, I don't know that I intentionally meant this, but as we talk here, I think there's a double meaning to that clean slate. It's a way for you to reset your mind as well.
Yes.
So just as we were talking here, okay, let's go ahead and we're going to restore those posts on the corners and stretch that wire. But that interior fence, had 7 to 10, percent of that wire gone. I may use those as anchor points instead of going back with permanent. So it gives me the opportunity to make smaller paddocks, utilizing what's already there, but maybe utilizing it slightly different. So, going back with, a single strand, or moving, more frequently. The other thing I think it really can do is, what's another economic opportunity that this presented to you that you didn't really think about? Okay. Now that canyon is a little less dense. And wow, when we went through there, we found a deer shed that, was monster size. And hey, okay, I didn't even know he was there. Now maybe I've got an opportunity to lease for a deer hunt. Or I've made enough dent into that area that I might actually get a goat to go down there and eat something now, and maybe even make a bigger difference. It doesn't just have to be the physical clean slate. It can be the mental clean slate as well. And how do I just manage differently and manage so that I hopefully never have to go through it at this level again?
I Couple different things on my mind. There will be more fires. Whether we'll have one that beats 1,000,000 acres. Okay, look, I'm not even gonna say it, okay, because after Anderson Creek, which was like 345, 350, it's like, "Oh, well, that was pretty big." Could be a while before we ever get another one that big. Not even 12 months later, Starbuck was like 630. Like, okay, that was bad. That was real bad. And then the Ray fire that burned out Jimmy Emmons, I think that was like 500 something.
Yep.
And now we've had Smokehouse Creek at over 1,000,000.
Yeah.
Just here in the Great Plains, just in the last 8 years. And it seems like for the 8 years before that, there wasn't like there weren't any big fires. A big fire would be 10 or 12,000 acres.
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't having these 300 to 1,000,000 acre mega fires 10 years ago. Not saying they didn't exist. I'm just saying I don't remember them.
Yeah. I think we are, one, we have way more access to information than we've ever had, Brian. And so I think those fires did occur. I can remember one that came through northern Oklahoma when I was a kid, and it was 100,000 acres. And we thought that was just enormous. And really, that was mostly grass that got burned. But I do think we have more access to information, but we are also now in the period of time where grass management has changed from the primary way to feed livestock to now it's the second most popular way to feed livestock. And so land management became way less important at that point. So now we're 50 years into less maintenance on our pastures. And so we've got 50 years worth of fuel built up in our cedars. And so we should have the expectation that the lack of management that we used over the last 50 years is going to create these unintended consequences.
Let me get this right. You just said that the packers and the feedlots and the corn, soy monocultures that are grown to feed cows contribute to wildfire danger?
They contribute to poor land management.
Okay. Which contributes to wildfire danger. I saw a TikTok this morning that kind of said that.
Yeah.
Like, and I just scrolled right past. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay. Yeah.
We gotta acknowledge that our industry follows trends, and those trends are what make people money. And so, we can't just say, those bad guys over there created a 1,000,000-acre wildfire. It is not just that. There's a multitude of factors here. And I truly believe that, love him to death, Smokey Bear has part of this. We created a fear around fire.
Yeah.
And it's a natural management tool that is free. We really need to understand the resources that are free and how we've ignored some of those: sun, rain, fire, and how that's how our landscape was developed. And I get a little passionate about this because we spend an awful lot of money trying to recreate something that's free.
Yes. Yes, we do. And, I agree with you. We need more fire education. We need to rebuild fire culture. There's pockets of it. We got a little pocket here in the Red Hills. There's a great pocket over in the Flint Hills.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of others. Okay. Now that I think about it, there's a lot of prescribed burn associations that have started in the last 15 years. Like, we got ours going here in Kansas. We got statewide. There's other chapters. We modeled ours off of one in Texas, so we weren't first. Like,
Yeah.
Edwards Plateau Prescribed Burn Association. I think Butch Taylor was the gentleman down there.
Right.
That was the model. That created a model for a lot of other people to work off of. Here in the Red Hills, we just had our annual meeting like 2 weeks ago right before I went on vacation. And guy, I'm hoping I get on the podcast, Direct Twidwell from University of Nebraska. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
God,
He's fascinating.
isn't he just awesome?
Yeah, he's great.
I mean, with the data that they put together with the rangeland analysis platform, it's tremendous. So what I'm getting at is just here in the Red Hills, just the land mass that our Gyp Hills Prescribed Burn Association is responsible for. We need to be burning about 30,000 acres a year to stay ahead of our cedar tree problem, just in our burn association. We have never made that. Like, I think the best year we managed to do about 14,000 acres across 12 burns. And we're going to try this year. Like I said, my big one may not go off. Since we've been doing this, I've gotten an email for next Tuesday. They're going to try to cook off 3,500 acres next Tuesday. So burn season is about ready to kick off here in the Red Hills. We're not doing enough. And it's not because of lack of will.
Mm-hmm.
It at all. We just don't have enough days. We don't have enough people. I mean, plain and simple, we need to have double the roster in our Prescribed Burn Association and double the equipment to get done what we need to get done every year.
Yeah. So let me flip a question at you, Brian.
Go for it.
Given the this is how we met was through a Prescribed Burn Association. So this pretty hard to our friendship here. If you got to make a choice on burns, are you doing maintenance burns first, or are you doing keeping it at bay burns? And what I mean by that is open ground burns versus burns where you got succession and it's active succession along margins. Because that's the discussion that we have to have as a nation is, do we save what's already out there first and put our efforts there? Or do we put our efforts to go and try and reclaim some of it? Because we don't have resources to do it all.
Okay, maybe I can keep all this straight in my head. Um, so one of the things that Direct Twidwell has been talking about for years is the concept of creating these cores, these defensible cores. And the two case studies that he's brought up, over the last 4 or 5 years, because, he keeps coming back to our burn association meetings.
Yeah.
I think the first time we talked to Direct was probably 2020. I mean, it was well after the wildfire.
Yeah.
And so the concept of a core is we're going to find an area, we're going to create an area or leverage a wildfire event and designate a core area where we're going to hold this core at all cost. And what the core is it's an area that doesn't have cedar trees. So what they've learned about cedar tree propagation is all we have to do is have about a 300-yard perimeter. Those seeds are only going to travel about 300 yards from the female tree because of the dwell time in the bird digestive tract, right? 200 yards, a lot of people say 200 yards, 200 to 300 yards. That's your radius of where those birds are going to drop seeds. We get rid of the female trees, we get rid of that seed source. So building and protecting the core is we need to have an area that we can go in and we can defend, that we get rid of all the female trees, A, and then B, get rid of all the rest of the trees. And then we have an area that we can defend. And once you have that core area that you're holding and maintaining cedar tree free, once you get your core established, your cedar tree problem is managed with a pair of handheld loppers and a couple of hours a week or a couple hours a month. Like, that's a good place to be with your cedar tree management. And I'm not going to lie, it's a hell of a lot of fun to sit in a big excavator and grind trees or rip them out of the ground and throw them away. Like, it's a lot of fun. It also costs a hell of a lot of money. Okay.
Yeah. If you're like Russell, drag big chain through the trees.
Oh man, that's pretty cool. Okay. So what we're talking about, for those of you that don't know, one of the other ways to get rid of cedar trees, especially burned up ones, it works fantastic on burned cedar trees. Now, the reason we want to get rid of these burned cedar trees is because every single one of them that's standing there is about 10,000 places for a bird to land and poop out another berry. And those cedar tree groves that are burned up, they kind of function like an exclosure. Cattle won't go in there. They won't graze. They might go in there and hide from you because they know you're not going to go in there with your horse or your four-wheeler, but they don't go in there and graze, at least not much. So the best thing to do with those burned up cedar trees, I think, is to mulch them, turn them into mulch, and return that biomass back to the soil. That's expensive. The cheaper way to do it is to get a pair of D7s and an old World War II aircraft carrier anchor chain that's about 500-600 feet long. Hook one end of the chain to one dozer, the other end of the chain to the other dozer, and just drive down a canyon. And that chain flattens everything behind it. It sounds simple. When it works well, it looks really cool.
It does look really cool.
But getting the dozers to kind of navigate around and stay the correct distance, it's a little more difficult to actually get pulled off in practice. And then
it's not like driving the grain cart next to the combine.
No. So that chain's been here in Barber County for a while, and I'm sure that there's more of them in the world. It's just we happen to kind of have had one here for 4 or 5 years. And so the outfit that was running it, their senior dozer operator passed away. Like, he was old. He'd had a great life. So they're without like a crew to run it. So this other crew took over. Well, the first guys, they had D7s, which is enough dozer for the chain. Well, our friend Russell, I think, came up with another length of chain, maybe 2, and spliced that in. And then this other outfit shows up with a pair of D6s, which are not quite enough dozer for that chain. So they have been on the bottom. They were on the bottom side of the learning curve when I left on vacation. I don't know what progress they've made, but they were just working over on on a ranch that's between me and Russell,
Yeah.
and they need it. And it's just, Steve, it is so cool to go over there in that place that Russell manages and drive
Yeah.
through it and be able to see it, because I know what it looked like 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's, you guys have a culture, Brian, and I think that's part of the solution. It is cultural leaders like yourself, like Russell, those that are down in Oklahoma that are frequent uses of fire. They're going to be the ones that bring this tool to the masses, so to speak. It's also about educating urbanites. Some of the biggest fire proponents in the Flint Hills live over in the Kansas City region because of the vegetation that comes and expresses itself in the Flint Hills. And so, there's some social forces that probably are going to need to step in here at some point. Folks don't want to lose our North American plains. I'm convinced of that. We don't want to lose this special ecosystem. They just aren't sure how bad it is and how urgent we need to start acting.
Well, Smokey Bear, and then the whole trees are good, cows are bad narrative.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back. I got kind of sidetracked talking about ball and chain. We were talking about, building a core, holding a core, and defending a core. So there's two examples that Dirac is like to use, and maybe he changes this depending on where he's giving his talk. But he says the two cores that they really try to focus on is the one that they have up in the Les Canyons Rangeland Alliance. They had a very similar wildfire that we did a couple of years earlier that wiped out a whole bunch of their cedar trees. They took advantage of it and built a core around that wildfire. Very similar to what we did with Anderson Creek, is we've built a core. And the ranch we were just talking about, where the ball and chain is running, is deep core. Like, I'm on the edge. We're really trying to work deep in that core. So you had a question about reclamation versus maintenance. And really, I don't know how to answer that. I feel like we're on our back. We're on the backs of our heels. We're really scrambling, trying to maintain and consolidate our core.
Yeah.
Is, I think, what the overall kind of focus for our burn association. Now, I'm looking at my little piece, Nate's looking at his little piece, and everybody's looking at their own little piece. But I think we all realize that, these burns that are strengthening the core and not necessarily trying to push out, we've got to do those. We've got to really strengthen and reinforce our core before we can really push out. So just kind of going mentally back through my list of what planned burns we have. I think this year, most of them are going to be core reinforcement burns and not core expansion burns.
Yeah.
But the maintenance thing. So a reclamation burn is what I would classify Anderson Creek as. And a lot of the burns that I've done previously, for the specific intent of trying to get rid of cedar trees.
Mm-hmm.
Those are your reclamation burns. When you're just trying to kill, your 2, 3, 4 foot tall cedar trees, you're trying to reset your grass, get some better production like they do in the Flint Hills most of the time. That's what I would call more of a maintenance type burn. And those generally aren't as scary as a reclamation burn, right? Your reclamation fires, you're dealing with a pretty spicy fuel load.
Yeah.
And then we generally do those kind of out on the ragged edge of the weather envelope where it's, where you're going to get some spicy fire behavior, where your humidity's low, where you're going to get a good kill on your cedar trees. Yeah. But that low humidity, you sure got to watch downwind a long ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's unfortunate that our resources have declined this way. And is it, the responsibility question comes up pretty frequently. Whose responsibility was it to help private landowners understand and and maintain their properties. And I don't know that the U.S., state, local, whatever government should have ever had any part of that. But it is a community and industry, agriculture, that I think bears that responsibility to provide the education. If we can provide resources in some form or fashion, even better. But we know how to do this. We really do. And you're part of that group that sort of taught everybody this is the process by which you can burn safely, you can and be covered from a liability standpoint, pool resources together so you can do it. And not everybody has to bear the burden of it, but it's an industry issue. And I really think as an industry and particularly our grazing lands community, we have to come together and talk about this. It may be just as important as the conversations we're having about water.
Yeah, that's water's a whole other can of worms. Um, where to start? Education, training, but liability is the big one. Like, and that's what keeps a lot of matches in somebody's pocket is liability and fear.
Yep.
And I can't speak to any other states, but in Kansas, we have the right to conduct agricultural burning. Like it's codified into law. Pretty sure most other plain states are going to be the same way. Now, county by county here in Kansas, they can put on burn bans, they can require burn permits. The way we've gotten around that by and large is by forming these burn associations. Okay. So when you're part of a burn association, you're part of a bigger group, and a bigger group always has a better voice with government than the voice of a single. And having a group that's affiliated with an established organization. Okay. You don't magically know how to do a burn safely. There's nothing that's going to impart that wisdom on you other than going to the training, learning a few things, and going out and seeing it in real life.
Yep.
Like, I mean, you got to get smoke in your lungs every once in a while. That's just kind of how it goes. But what a burn association does, and this is what I think a lot of people don't understand, is the burn association keeps the records. They say, these are all the burns we did. These are the plans that we had. This is the prescription we used, and this is why. We have done 53 burns and burned 100,000 acres. And we have not had one escape because we do things like we prepare fire guards ahead of time. We have other people drive around and make sure, hey, this looks safe. We have more than adequate crew. We have good equipment. We take care of these things in the planning process. And, other members are kind of backstopping other members. Like, hey, did you look at that, that thing over there that you got marked at point 1 on the map? Like, do we really want to go around that? Or do we can we cut around the east and get away from some of that problem? Like, oh yeah, let's do that. The liability is huge. And I'm not sure what there is currently available for liability insurance. Insurance is only going to protect you so much, because if you can get sued for it, somebody will sue you for it. Yeah. If you're protected, and I don't think really anybody is, but when you have a group that's doing things the same way every time, and you have a proven track record of success, when you do have one get away from you, when you do lose a fire and the worst thing happens and, you hurt somebody on the road because they were in smoke, you burn up somebody's house, you can go back and say, hey, we've done 100 fires over the last 10 years and never had a problem. This one, we're not sure what happened, but we're definitely going to, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to make sure it never happens again. It's affordable. It's like, you can't afford to not burn. Like, you can't afford not to do it. Yeah. That's the bottom line.
If you were to just take a wild guess, Brian, the association and their investment just into the equipment and spread it across, all members of the equipment, what do you think is your guys' average investment in that?
Oh, I wouldn't know how to come up with that. But I will say, having the association and being affiliated with Kansas State Prescribed Burn Association and the Kansas Prescribed Burn Council, we have a 501c3. So we get equipment donated to us.
Yeah.
National Wild Turkey Federation, Chickadee Checkoff, and a couple other NGOs, I can't remember. They bought us a nice little, I think, 18 or 20 foot tandem axle enclosed trailer. We've got chainsaws, generators, signs, water, all kinds of stuff in there. I mean, hand tools for fires. It's got a desk. It's got a place where, the burn boss could go be and coordinate and do things if he had to get static. Radios are the most important thing for burn association.
Yep.
Period. And I think down here we've got 20 radios that have been donated to us or donated to the association. And 20 radios at $450 or $500 a copy for a nice Motorola.
Yeah.
I mean, those ain't cheap.
No.
We've got a truck. We've got a big high capacity truck. I mean, there's some association members that put money out of their own pocket and out of their own bank accounts into maintaining that truck. It lives in their shop.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's around and it can be used. We've got several nurse trailers, tender trailers, like old fertilizer trailers that have just been cleaned out. We've got agreements with local co-ops that we can go borrow those, fertilizer tender trailers for almost nothing, use them on a fire. We've even called out some of the local water hauling companies, like 80-barrel water trucks. Like, hey, would you mind rinsing a truck out real quick and running out here with some potable water if we need it? Like, you want to talk about pretty cool. Like, if we have to push the panic button for water, we can get we can get a couple bobtails and a couple transports. We're also in an oil, an area with some oil field activity, so that's kind of nice. If we were just doing it on our own, just me as Alexander Ranch, and then I'll go help my neighbors over on their ranch, and kind of the way we did it back in the 80s and 90s. We wouldn't have a lot of those resources. We wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have that nice donated trailer. We wouldn't have all those radios. We wouldn't have that big truck. We wouldn't be able to get those nurse tanks. So that's one of the other benefits of joining a burn association is you get access to equipment. You get a place for NGOs and big corporations to donate money.
Yeah. So about an hour ago, you mentioned that somebody had put a $10 an acre tag on keeping cedars at pay annually for your pastures. Is that number with or without a PBA?
I think that was just kind of a gross number from mechanical control.
Okay.
Now thinking about it, and that's probably what your mechanical control bill is gonna be is $10 a year, $100 every decade is what you need to put into it. Fire probably cheapens that up a little bit. I mean, fire will change that math a little bit. You're still got to put the maintenance dollars in.
Yeah, for sure. I was doing some just homework here recently in some of these areas of ours, and it's about $600 per acre to just hire it cleared. And that doesn't dispose of carcasses. That doesn't do anything. That's just to get the dozer in there, push it around, and so that you can now actually start to deal with some of what the vegetation is. And, trying to do the math on that, it just doesn't work when, a Bic lighter is $1.25 these days.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. We've talked an awful lot about fire.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really has any clue who you are, buddy.
All right.
Tell us who you are now that we're an hour and a half into this thing. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks. My name's Steve Swaffer. I'm currently employed by the Noble Research Institute. I work down here as a a regenerative ranching advisor. I spent the previous 8 years as the executive director with No Till on the Plains, which is a nonprofit that promotes soil health. They were based out of Kansas. I'm now in Ardmore, Oklahoma, with Noble. And then prior to that, I spent 13 and a half years working for the Kansas Farm Bureau. That's how Brian and I met. I had a couple of different capacities there as the natural resources director, and did a lot of policy work in the Kansas State Capitol, and on some fire stuff in the Kansas State Capitol. So, this goes back clear into the beginnings of my career. From a personal standpoint, I've got a couple of degrees in ecology. I grew up on my grandparents' cattle and wheat farm, and spent an awful lot of weekends filling drills with wheat and, moving big mama cows around. But I didn't really grow up on the farm. I grew up in the city in Tulsa. And it was the farm that continued to pull me back, and that I just like to be outside, hunt, fish, garden, all of that stuff that we earthy, crunchy, late 50s guys tend to head towards. And, so that's me. I've been married. I will be married 30 years this coming Tuesday on March 12th to my lovely wife, Donna. And we have 2 adult children, Tyler and Nate.
Well, happy anniversary. And for those of you that listen on March 12th, you can send Steve a little note and say happy anniversary.
Yeah, she's the trooper in this situation. Trust me.
Yeah, I've known you. I mean,
I had somebody ask me what the key to a successful marriage was, and I said, find somebody who will put up with your BS.
yes, I almost thought it the other way, is the woman who's crazy you can tolerate. It's all right. I'll get in trouble for that one later. I said it, not
Yeah,
you.
well, I'm not even touching that one, pal.
All right. So what do you got going on for Noble? I know last year you guys were working on the Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course. Has there been any developments with that, or has that changed?
Yeah. So Brian was really gracious to give us a lot of feedback on this first course that we've developed as Noble. And again, it's a foundational course in how you get started in regenerative agriculture, focused almost solely on soil health principles and ecosystem processes and how those can benefit you. We've made some changes based on the feedback that we got. We wanted to provide this as a very practical course and get your hands dirty. That's really what we think ranchers gravitate towards. Is I can sit in a classroom for a little while and I can absorb this, but if I can't go out and put it to use, then it's not valuable to me. And so we have integrated what was an all day out in the field Tuesday or second day now to part of the courses out in the field both days. And so we're really, really trying to take that feedback and incorporate it. I think we're getting closer. There's nothing's ever perfect. So that's the one that we've got the most experience with. I've been teaching that course over the last year. Just got back from doing one, have a couple more coming up here in the near future.
Is that still called Essentials of Regenerative Ranching?
No, we have renamed it. It's called Noble Land Essentials, but the content is the same.
Okay.
The other courses that we're working on, we have a grazing course. It's sort of an essentials of regenerative grazing. So not going to get real deep real quick, but talk about the foundational things that as a regenerative rancher who wants to do adaptive, multi-paddock, high density grazing, these are considerations that you really need to be thinking about. You don't just jump into this with, I got a real Gallagher fence, let's go, kind of thing. Those are that's already occurring. We have a course actually this weekend down in Waller, Texas, for the grazing. In development is a more advanced business of grazing course. And that will get deployed later this year. We're really focusing on how to take advantage of your ranch to benefit your business the most. And so you're going to focus on making better use of ungrazed areas or putting that back into the rotation. Those are the concepts that we're going to try to relate to them and then put, dollar figures to it. What is that return on investment if you make those choices? And then finally, we've got a noble business course coming out very soon. It's again kind of in our essentials line of courses, the essentials of regenerative noble business, and just kind of getting people focused on, if you're not paying attention to these numbers and if you're not monitoring it, how are you ever know you're profitable or not? And how are you going to take advantage of some of these opportunities that are going to at some point present themselves? So, the scenario I love to lay out, wow, it's been a great production year and we're mid-year and I've had well in it above my annual average precipitation that I should have, and I've got extra grass. Do I have a plan? If I don't have a plan, then I'm not being a good business person. And so those are the kinds of things that we're trying to really get folks to understand. And so you can get on noble.org and see where all of our course offerings are.
Awesome. I got to take a quick break and go recycle a little bit of coffee.
I will do the same.
All right. Well, I'll be right back.
All right.
And we're back. So I got to tell you, it's weird when you go to a place like Hawaii, like in the resort we were staying on. My buddy was like, "Oh man, if you want coffee, just go down to Starbucks. Just go down to Starbucks." I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. It's easy. We did that the first morning. Well, first off, I don't pay attention to what things cost. Like when Tanya goes to town, like, how much do you spend on that new washer and dryer? She just says $5. Like, okay, whatever. It's $25 for 2 coffees.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you're paying Starbucks premium, then you're paying resort premium, and then you're paying Hawaii premium on top of that. So it's like 4 times what it really should be. So I think it was the second day we were there, we had the car and we were heading up to the North Shore, and Tanya goes, "If you see a bathroom, I need to stop." And like literally 3 seconds later, I see this sign that says restrooms that way. So I pull in real quick. We park and I get out and we look, and it's Green World Coffee Farm. Like, oh, well, this is convenient. I just happen to want another cup of coffee. And it was really cool because they were growing, like it was a coffee plantation.
Mhm.
Like they were growing their coffee trees. They were roasting them on and roasting the beans on site. So everything was right there on the farm. Of course, like I brought home pounds of coffee,
Of course.
pounds of coffee. So I'm drinking some of this excellent coffee from Green World Coffee Farms. I think it's called their Rainbow Blend. So it's a little bit of light roast, a little bit of medium roast, a little bit of dark roast. Personally, I think it's just everything they had left over from all the other bags. They just kind of threw them in one bag, said,
We call that floor sweepings in the seed world.
yeah. So it's I'm drinking some floor sweepings rainbow coffee. So yeah. I guess the other really big thing that's been in the news besides the fires in Texas, and maybe the fires in Texas and the relief effort have kind of taken some of the attention away. What do you think about the EID mandate they're trying to push through?
Yeah, so I'm probably gonna have to default back to some of my past history here, Brian, and that last word is what it just gives me the willies, quite honestly. Um, I see some value in the information that can be provided through a system like this. There's no question about that. But we are a country that is built on entrepreneurship, independent business people. Let's be honest, we live in a republic, not a democracy. But we need to respect the people who are producing the product, whether it be an animal or a widget. And the regulatory imposition that is put on folks that cuts into their bottom line, if it is not a human health risk, a world health risk, it just seems silly to me. Now, I think somebody might make the case that this is a world or a human health risk. I'm not buying it. I'm just not. We've been eating this protein source since we arrived, and our incidence of disease and sickness is so minuscule that I just don't see the return on investment for a system like this. I'm good with voluntary, no problem. But I struggle when somebody says, you have to do this, and we're at a, 99% plus success rate.
The problem I have with it is they're going to tell us that we have to do it, but they're not going to impose any additional scrutiny on any other imports.
Yeah.
There's going to be no burden for traceability for any of these imports. They're going to put all the burden on where the problem isn't.
Yeah.
The problem is not the American farmer and rancher. The problem is not the cattle we're putting into the supply. But the problems that get into our beef supply come in on the imports, come in on the marginally inspected USDA approved facilities in other countries. Like, it boggles my mind that they're going to tell us that we have to track and trace our animals for health reasons. And we want to sell to somebody, it's got to go through a federally inspected plant. But if JBS wants to import 200,000 animals, we'll just stamp that at the port of entry and not inspect their processing facility and just assume it's clean because they said so.
Yeah, it's both sides of the mouth, cake and eat it too. I mean, it's troublesome, and I really feel like this is someplace that our elected officials need to step in and say, hey, as a representative of my constituents, I have a problem with this. And I don't have a problem taking our elected officials to task in a polite, respectful manner. And I think that's kind of going back to my time as a policy individual. We kind of work people out. Hey, call your so-and-so and tell them to do so-and-so. And we did it, and we did it, and we did it. And then we didn't get the results we expected from that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to do it. It's important that they know you're paying attention to how they vote. You're paying attention to the issues that they put at the top of their agenda. And if that's not the constituent issues, it's time to change.
But I understand what you're saying. And I'm thinking about the representation that we have here in Kansas. And what they're like when they're in front of you versus how they vote. And it seems like, well, follow the money. It's always follow the money, right? And independent producers, small producers, we don't have the mouthpiece that NCBA has, that JBS has, that Tyson, Cargill. We don't have the mouthpiece. They own the megaphone.
Yeah.
And they control who gets to use it.
I'm gonna go back a little step. You said, when we see our elected officials, when we interact with them, it's different than the way they vote. I'm going to call it dating. When you first asked Tanya out on a date, when I asked Donna out on a date, for the first, how many of those dates? It was our representative on that date. It was not us. It was somebody who represented us. And until you move in with them, you don't get the real person. I mean, the whole real person. And that's why it is so important that when you walk in the room, Senator so-and-so or Representative so-and-so says, I know that person and I know where they stand. And if we had more people that were recognizable to those elected officials, then when they come home, they're going to have to mind a little better when they go back to Washington, D.C., because it is the power of the money that you contribute to campaigns. Let's not underestimate how much difference that can make. And it's the power of your vote. They are always in reelection mode. Even if it's 6 years, they're in reelection mode. Use that to our advantage. I can't emphasize enough that this is a government of representation. And if it's not fairly representing interests, it's time to speak out.
And I think it is time to speak out. It's time for everybody to get loud. It's time for everybody to speak out. And
Yeah,
time for everybody to speak out.
our industry is a minority voice. We're going to have to megaphone it. Let's be honest.
Yep. What, I guess wrap us up. What are some of your concerns for 2024 and how are you going to deal with them?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer, Brian, is drought, but I'm not concerned about the drought. I'm concerned about how land responds to what is a cycle that it will continue to have to go through. And it is the management of that soil and those forages that's going to make all the difference in the world. I've been to your place, and I've been to lots of ranches all over the world. And quite honestly, the ones that never worry about drought are the ones that are managed so that the focus is the soil and the plants and the sunlight, at least at an equal level with the livestock. In some cases, it's more. The focus is actually more. I've heard your dad say, I'm a son farmer, you know, that's that's what my chore is try to get everybody to think that it's not just about that animal that I'm producing out there. It's about that living ecosystem that is in the soil. It's about that plant's ability to reproduce so that it's there for me every year. That's my goal. And I feel pretty tickled that I get to encounter people like you, because it's renewal for me. It's recovery for me, because we have a big task in front of us, quite frankly. And just complaining about drought and looking at what historic level of drought it is this year versus 2 years ago, that didn't change anything. We've got to take action. So, those for 2024, that's my goal. Get out there and get that word into everybody I can and say there's a better, different way to manage.
Awesome. Great stuff. All right. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
Yeah, I'm at the Noble Research Institute, SM Swaffer, SWAFFAR at noble.org. My phone number's on the website. I don't have it committed to memory. I'm sorry. But our phone number's on memory. Steve Swaffer, you can get me through Noble, and SM Swaffer at noble.org.
Okay. And where can people find out information about the upcoming courses, the Noble Land Essentials and the other ones you mentioned?
Yeah. So if you get right onto the front page of our website, there's a blue button that says find a course, and it will take you right to both the listing of the Noble Land Essentials courses and the Noble Grazing Essentials courses. And then as soon as we've got the others, those will be posted up. So we got scheduled out through August for both of those right now. And I would expect to see our fall and winter offerings anytime.
Awesome. Great stuff. Anything I forgot?
No, man. There's a lot of whiskers between you and me in the years that we met, but I got to tell a little story on you. So first time we met, you were clean shaven, and I don't think you'd been out of the Army very long. And it was at prescribed fire council meeting somewhere in Wichita, probably at the Great Plains Nature Center. And we had kind of said, this is a guy that we could put into a leadership position. And you said, yeah, okay, I could probably handle that. And I think it was probably 18 months later, we came down to your all's ranch, and yeah, I think it was a Nat GLC tour is what it was. And Brian is standing over on the wall, and he's grown the beard that he has now, and he's got a big bucket hat on. And I turned to probably Tim Christian or Barth Crouch or one of those guys that we've all known. And I said, who is that guy over there? And they looked at me and said, well, that's Brian. And I said, Brian, who? and I really think about that moment a lot, because that was a fantastic crowd. For one, those were the top grazing folks in the world, quite honestly, that were at that ranch. But that's also the point at which I saw the transformation of Brian Alexander, and that was pretty cool.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. In my mind, it happened a few years later.
Okay.
I still felt like a fraud that time period you were talking about. It was 2014.
Yeah.
We had our burn meeting in February, which like third week of February, I think third Thursday of February is right around when we normally have our association meeting. And in 2014, we had it down at Buster's. And a gentleman walked up to me and he stuck his hand out and said, my name's Ed Brickert. It's nice to meet you, sir. He says, I want you to burn my ranch, was the second thing he said to me. And I said, okay. Because he was new to the area, and we became really good friends. And one of the best fires that I've ever been fire boss on was in 2014, was when I burned Ed's ranch.
Yeah.
And the primary objective was to clean out these 3 canyons that kind of laid in there, like southwest and northeast. And I figured I need kind of a southwest wind to do it. I'd like to have about 75 degrees, about 25% relative humidity, about 14-mile-an-hour wind. I could have ordered that day because I got it.
Wow.
We executed the plan, and the way it got lit, we're just a little bit lucky with the wind and weather conditions that day. We managed to send a head fire down all 3 of those canyons simultaneously, got every single tree in them. I had a smoke column to 35,000 feet, and I was dropping ash in Pratt, Kansas.
At least it wasn't going across state line, right?
0 bonus acres. 0 bonus acres.
There you go. 0 bonus acres.
Yeah. No bonus acres. That's always a good thing. But yeah. That was the start of a very beautiful friendship with Ed and I. And that's, in my mind, that's kind of when I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do this.
We all knew that you could, because your dad told us that you could.
Sometimes he's, I'm not going to say he's full of crap, but sometimes he's full of crap.
He's full of crap, but when he said this to us, we knew.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Yeah. Keep it up.
All right. Let's get out of here, gang.
All right. I got another meeting to go to in less than 1 minute. So.
All right. Well, enjoy it, Steve. Glad we got a chance to catch up. See you.
Safe travels.
Yep. Gang, have a great week.
You too.